Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a tough act to follow.
Yeah.
And you represent a lot of clients. I've been a lawyer for 40 years, and I have represented thousands of clients, several hundred child sex abuse victims. And I cannot think of a single individual who brings to a case the inner strength that Candace found over the last couple of years. And I find it difficult to say in words how much I admire her strength throughout a very challenging time of a couple of last 3 years in her life. People who see the result, I don't think understand how much it takes to go through being the person who stands up first and confronts a powerful institution. And this is a very powerful and very secretive and very controlling institution. And so, at the end of my career, I'm going to look back and I'm going to say, you know, I had this case, I had that case, but I had Candace Conti. And I'll say it with great pride. The case was not about changing the beliefs and doctrines of Jehovah's Witnesses. That is not the role that our court system plays in religion. Whether it be the Catholic Church, whether it be any organization, religious organization, our government doesn't tell folks what to believe, and it doesn't tell folks things about how their philosophy and how their internal procedures should be run in a religious setting. What we do say to all institutions and organizations, whether religious or not religious, doesn't matter whether it's the Boy Scouts, whether it's a swing club, or whether it's a church. All organizations have the same obligation under the law and are treated the same under the law, and that's the obligation to protect children in activities from sexual abuse by known child offenders. What made this case the one to take on the WatchTower was the fact that Jonathan Kendrick not only had previously molested another child, but it was reported. And not only was it reported to the local elders, but it was reported in writing to WatchTower New York. And not only was it reported to WatchTower New York, but New York gave instructions back to the local elders on what to do. And with great pride, the lawyers for the WatchTower said, well, we removed him as a ministerial servant. And our response to that was, okay, so you got a convicted child molester in your congregation, and in your view, the appropriate response is, but we're not going to let him pass out books at the back of the meeting. Said, not enough. That was not enough. And part of the thing that rankles us about rank and file member, which was the phrase that the WatchTower lawyers used over and over, it's just a rank and file member. He was not just a rank and file member. He was a minister. He was a member in good standing. He was a brother. And he was in a small congregation where he had already molested one child, and he was allowed to stay in secret and to go into field service, not just with Candace, which was his opportunity to molest her, but to come to the doors of anyone in the community. He could come to my house on a Saturday morning, and all of the jury, none of whom were Jehovah's Witnesses, were aghast that people could be coming to your door with the sanction of a religious organization who knows they are convicted child abusers. This has nothing to do with religious beliefs. This has everything to do with being responsible citizens in a community where there are children. And that's what this case was about. And that's what a successful case against WatchTower requires. There's been a lot of cases, and many of them have not been successful. They've been thrown out by the courts because they didn't meet certain threshold legal standards. For example, cases that are based upon family abuse, where the elders may have learned that a father or uncle or adult male is molesting a child in the family but have not intervened. That's probably not going to get over the obstacles that the law places in the path of a case of childhood sexual abuse in an institutional setting, because the control and the power of the elders in that situation is limited. Now, we do have, in this era, mandatory reporting of child sex abuse. And elders, as the clergy of Jehovah's Witnesses now, are legally required to report reasonable suspicion of childhood sexual abuse to Child Protective Services or law enforcement. Whether they meet that standard in any individual case, that's a different question. But that's the legal requirement. Now, that law was not in place when Candace was abused. And the family that she refers to that was abused by a family member, they didn't really have a case because it was a family situation. But they went to the elders for help, because that's what we see in the Jehovah's Witnesses. People go to the elders for help and for safety, because not only was Jonathan Kendrick a childhood sexual abuser, he was a violent man. He was a very sick man, and I would wager remains that way today, as a member in good standing of the congregation in Oakley, California. And when they went to the elders, Evelyn Kendrick told us in court that they went for safety. They wanted the elders to make them safe. And the elders did not do that. And in fact, they blamed Evelyn, just as Cynthia said. They said, well, if you had more sex with him, he wouldn't be doing that to your daughter. And they blamed the victim. And that is part of the institutional response that we have learned of in many, many, many people's own personal narratives. It has nothing to do with the case or the law or anything. That's the experience that we have heard from, Candace and I, from hundreds of people around the world since this verdict became public a month ago. I know that's not an isolated experience, but once Kendrick was known as a child sexual abuser and documented as that to New York, then they had an obligation to protect other kids, and that's what the judge found.